Thank you so much, Dan. And it's really a pleasure to be here with all of you today. Thank you for all of your work and environmental activism in helping to keep California safe. And so today I'm going to talk us through the state of play with wildfire in California. I'm going to go through a little bit in terms of how we got here as a state, the factors that have led up to where we are today, and then move on to really the solutions for wildfire resilience and talk about this big paradigm shift that we're undertaking. The big news is that the legislature is about to vote on our big wildfire budget. It's very exciting. Yeah, last year we were at 75 million. This year we're now, I think I gave Dan probably this bio maybe 2 months ago, but now we are, for information that's about 2 months old, we're now looking at 1.5 billion for wildfire resilience. That's in addition to a suppression budget. So that's all of that preventative work that I'm going to talk about today. We're going to see a huge increase in the scale of this work, and at a scale that is sound for our environment that protects both communities and ecologies. So California's wildfire crisis, as all of us are living today, is starting to feel like the apocalypse is greatest hits. It feels like every year the crisis is worse than anyone had possibly imagined in terms of the scale of the crisis we're facing. Last summer, we had 5 of the 6 largest fires in state history burning simultaneously. We have only, in California's entire history of fire, even prehistory, have we ever had fires, that there's only 2 examples of fires crossing the Sierra, so burning up and over granite of that crest of the Sierra. That's only happened twice in California's entire history, and they both happened in August of 2021. That was the Dixie Fire and the Calder Fire. So these are fires that are behaving in ways that are erratic, extreme, and beyond, when I talk to the fire chiefs, anything that they have seen before. Last summer, we had 250,000 displaced. We've had over 50,000 people displaced from wildfires at any given point. And so it is incredibly impactful on communities, economies, ecologies. I am incredibly grateful. I think all of you who live in fire-prone communities can see this. We've had some devastating losses this summer, but the work of our firefighters on the ground has been heroic. The capacity of communities to evacuate safely has been remarkable. And because communities are leaving, because people have put in resilience work in advance, because we've had fuel breaks and some thinning projects in key places up and down and around the Tahoe Basin, they were able to keep the communities of Pollock Pines, the town of Myers and South Lake Tahoe standing, even in the face of a fire that burned up and over the Sierra and through granite. So it's just really important to understand where we are. The 4th climate assessment back in 2018 predicted that we would see a 77% increase in annual acres burned in California by the end of the century 100. What we saw between 2019 and 2020 was a 1,500% increase in acres burned. We went from 277,000 acres burned in 2019 to 4.2 million acres burned in 2020. We're almost at 2 million acres burned for this summer alone, double the 5-year average already, and we're only partway through fire season. So what that's telling us is that climate model prediction that was to come at the end of the century showed up 80 years early, and more extreme than we had anticipated. So what's going on? How did we get here? There's really 2 factors. 2 multi-generational crises are colliding as we speak. So what we have are the fire is part of California's ecology. This is a fire-adapted ecosystem. Tribes had managed California's ecology managed with natural prescribed cultural burns for millennia. Colonization ended the widespread practice of controlled burning from the tribes. And then we introduced clear cutting from the gold rush era. So that clear cut 97% of California's forests. which meant that our old growth, fire resilient forests were then starting to get replaced by a homogeneous forest that was densely packed. Then came a political decision. So Gifford Pinchot and Teddy Roosevelt understood the ecology of fire adapted ecosystems in the West. When they established the Forest Service, this sort of pinnacle of the conservation movement, it was presented like the Congress wouldn't fund it. They did not like the conservation movement. They did not like the radical concept of public land. And so they were refusing to fund the Forest Service, and it was a dying agency 5 years after it was established. So in 1910, Gifford Pinchot and Teddy Roosevelt presented the Forest Service as a fire suppression entity because Congress was afraid of catastrophic wildfire. And so that created the Forest Service policy of fires out by 10 a.m., this sort of 24-hour cycle, and we're going to put all the fires out. And so that removed that fire suppression policy, which was a political decision that ignored the ecology. And it was a political trade-off to allow the Forest Service to survive. It led us to 100 years of fire suppression, which meant that these overly dense forests then had no vehicle to thin them out back to their normal ecology. Well, then, and so this shows us kind of the difference between how a fire behaves in a fire suppressed forest versus a forest that has been managed with prescribed fire, or sometimes you have to thin them out by hand first, and then you can follow with prescribed fire or grazing. There are lots of tactics to get to that ecologically managed structure. But right now, what you're seeing on one column is that dense forest. It has what are called ladder fuels. So the underbrush and the small trees, when the fire hits that forest floor, then it goes up into the tree canopy and it becomes a catastrophic event that burns all the way down deep into the topsoil, and it devastates the watershed. Because not only do you lose your ecology, your forest, your ecosystem, you lose your watershed because that topsoil then will start running off, silting up our dams, causing problems in our streams, but also not allowing the mountains to be the reservoirs themselves that they're supposed to, because that soil structure is gone. In an ecologically managed forest, what you can see is a forest that has been thinned out, that these pine trees naturally drop their lower limbs. Most fire adapted trees do. And so when the fire comes through, it burns at a much cooler temperature and a much shorter flame length. So what that means is it just burns up kind of the undergrowth and thins out the weaker trees, and it burns at a temperature that allows native plants to germinate and creates a nice little crisp top crust on the soil that actually improves carbon sequestration and water and forest hydrology. So it improves the watershed's function as well as habitat. So fire is a really critical tool on the landscape, but the scale and the size of fire that we have been having is ecologically devastating. It's sort of like saying, hey, my garden needs water, and then somebody shows up with a fire hose, and then your garden is just gone. So that's the level of fire that we've been experiencing lately. And so we're trying to get back into a more resilient forest structured state and for our fire adapted ecologies. The challenge we're having is that climate change is now creating compounding cycles of fire on the landscape that are now self-perpetuating. We are still probably in the drought from 2012, right? So we had this mega drought, once in a millennia drought, and it killed off 169 million trees throughout the Sierra. This is a picture around Shaver Lake, where they had almost 90% tree die-off in that area. And so what happens with tree mortality, again, those forests are really dense, they're competing for water, and then they don't have enough water to push out the pine beetles that come in. So they don't have the sap to get those beetles out. And also the warmer winter temperatures haven't been holding those beetle populations in check. So that's where you get the link between drought and beetle kills. And what happens with beetle kill, and Professor Scott Stevens at UC Berkeley has been really helpful on this. he studied the impact of this tree mortality on fire, and we saw it manifest with the creek fire. You had much larger diameter trees dying from the beetles. They target the big trees. And so when our forest fuel models are typically built around 3-inch diameter wood lining the forest floor, what instead we were having around Shaver Lake and these high tree mortality areas was 30-inch diameter wood. So that meant you just had huge logs kind of essentially piled up, driving the ground of a fire. So when the creek fire broke out last year, in that area around Shaver Lake, it created a heat signature that was unprecedented. Because it was a phenomenon called standing combustion. And these forest scientists, when they study standing combustion, they use examples, the real life examples at scale of standing combustion. And standing combustion just means that there's an active flame throughout the entire fire footprint. Whereas usually, as you've probably been watching in these more recent fires, like the Caldor fire, there's kind of a flaming hot front and then a cool center. It smolders out pretty quickly in the middle. And it grows and it burns on the front of the fire. But this fire, the creek fire, had the standing combustion phenomena where you had active flames throughout the entire acreage of the fire at once. That created the pyrocumulus you see there, which went up 50,000 feet in the air and created its own weather system. That was creating dry lightning, fire tornadoes, and it would collapse on firefighters, pushing out hurricane force winds in every direction several times a day. So just the dynamic, I mean, I talked to a firefighter on the ground in the creek fire. He said he knew the pillar was collapsing when limbs started falling from the sky. These are incredibly dynamic and difficult conditions to work in and difficult fires to navigate. But these fire scientists said that their examples of standing combustion before the creek fire was the Tokyo fire bombings and the bombings of Dresden. So we were having war zone-like conditions on the ground in our watersheds. And so then these challenges from these fires then continue to compound. So it devastates the watershed, which then exacerbates drought conditions. It can cause mudslides. And obviously we're all seeing the impacts from wildfire smoke just on our health. Recent studies are demonstrating links between increased rates of COVID and wildfire smoke because it's impacting your immune system. And so really just making sure that we are trying to get that heat intensity out. It's really important to understand when you're talking about prescribed fire or the natural severity of fire in our ecologies, that's not giving off the level of emissions that have been causing problems. So prescribed fire is not sort of a major air pollutant challenge for us, which is great. The other aspect that we have to understand is also just the human aspect of this. You know, I was on the ground in the recovery of Paradise, and it was devastating. You know, that we had 50,000 people displaced there, and people who were already sort of living on the margins didn't have the resources to get to safety, to get to support. Everybody was traumatized with mental health. We saw this with the Caldor fire. I had fire evacuees living with me for 2 weeks, one of whom was 8.5 months pregnant when she showed up, and we were worried she's going to have the baby any day. They got home. She didn't have the baby yet. But there's real human impact on this. I mean, people that even just being evacuated for several weeks, when you lose the content of your freezer, a lot of people don't have the income to then restock. Or in these communities that are entirely dependent on summer tourism, like around the Dixie Fire or the Caldor Fire in Tahoe. You know, most of these communities get 100 days of income for the year from summer tourists. And when you can't have any recreation and you're evacuated for that entire window, there's no income. And so they're just compounding crises from these catastrophic fires. So let me give you a little bit of hope because the climate crisis is here. But one thing we can control is the health of our forest and our fire adapted ecologies. So this is a forest. Just make a guess to yourself where you think this is. Take a minute. Okay, you all have a guess? All right, this is actually a Jeffrey pine forest in Baja, California. So it was never clear cut. It has had natural fire return intervals every 15 to 20 years throughout its entire life. And it is thriving at a much hotter ecozone. And so we don't necessarily have to endure forest type conversion from climate change. That when these forests are thinned out to their more natural resilient density, then we can actually have them thrive. And we saw that with the Creek Fire. There was an area that was, amazingly enough, commercially managed timberlands from Southern California Edison. They do selective logging, managed with prescribed fire. They're just really good models of silviculture. And they had the Forest Service land that had not been managed had 90% tree mortality from the drought. The managed land from the Southern California Edison had 25% tree mortality from those beetle kills. And so then they were able to thin it out. The Creek Fire actually laid down in their lands around Shaver Lake and burned ecologically. So their forests are still standing, whereas you drive through much of the rest of the Creek Fire and it's just a nuked landscape where not even shrubs are really coming back. I was there about 4 or 5 months ago, and we had so little rain this year that you're not even just getting sort of that like initial aftergrowth because that fire burned so hot and so deep. So what we are doing is really investing in 3 fronts of fire resilience so that our ecologies and our communities can not just survive catastrophic fire, but really thrive. So we are investing across the landscape where we are trying to get California's fire adapted ecologies back to the right fire return interval. So whether you're talking about oak woodlands, meadows, coastal redwoods, high alpine forests, in the Sierra, they all have sort of a unique fire ecology. And so trying to get them restored to the right density so that when fire comes through, that it burns at an ecological level as opposed to the catastrophic level. The next area is really the wildland urban interface. So that is where we're putting in strategic fuel breaks. These are tools for firefighters to be able to take a stand, tools for firefighters to access a fire in a really intense fire like the Caldor or others, and areas for communities to evacuate during a fire. That last level are interventions inside the community. So this is our goal, to make sure that your house doesn't become the center of the fire. So this is where you put in defensible space, home hardening, to be able to help communities withstand if a fire comes through. You need all 3 of these, right? There's a lot of popular narrative that said, just do home hardening. The challenge is that heat level gets so intense that any intervention you do won't be able to withstand the fire after a certain point. So that's why we lower that heat intensity in the landscape so that the ecologies are healthy with fire. We put in strategic fuel breaks so that when fires break out, we're able to get communities out and firefighters in, and then harden homes so that when embers are flying into a community, the homes don't become the ignition source. This is an example of landscape scale intervention. So this was a project done by the Sierra Nevada. The North Fire burned up into the area where they did the fuel reduction. And you can see underneath the forest what they had done, underneath those green trees, they had thinned it out. And so they had gone through, taken out the understory, restored it more to a natural density. So when the North Complex fire hit last summer, it actually put itself out. It burned underneath those trees for a little bit and then expired. And so that saved the town of Quincy in a really very dynamic and difficult fire. So we've seen this work. We also saw the Caples fire impact the Caldor, it's sort of a prescribed fire up around Caples Lake area, impacted the Caldor fire and made it a little more manageable relatively around Kirkwood. This is an example. When we talk about fuel breaks, I think it's important for folks to understand what we're actually talking about. Often what we're putting in are shaded fuel breaks, not the dozer lines. And the dozer lines are put in sort of in the emergency conditions in a fire. A shaded fuel break is a little more strategic. It's going to feel a little more like a park-like condition. They're often on the other side of roads or in strategic areas where firefighters need to be able to take a stand. The goal of a fuel break is actually to allow communities to escape during a fire, so you don't want flames hitting that road. So even in the middle of a really incredibly dynamic fire, we had 5 strategic fuel breaks in that area around Shaver Lake in the Creek Fire. They saved 700 homes and allowed people to evacuate in the middle of that fire, right? There's fire all around them, but the strategic fuel break allowed them to get out. And so that's really why we do this. Sometimes people are saying, oh, well, the fire flame went over the fuel break. It's like, yes, sometimes these fires, like the Calder fire, jumped Highway 50. It was spotting 3 miles ahead of the flame. Like, these fuel breaks aren't designed to stop the head of a wind-driven fire. They are designed to allow firefighters to access the fire. We saw a fuel break around Myers that had been put in by the Tahoe Conservancy. When the Calder fire hit it, the flame lengths were about 150 feet, right? So that's like, what is that, 15-story building, right? And so the firefighters went in to that fuel reduction area, and the flames dropped to 15 feet. And so they were then able to take a stand, stage their equipment there, and hold the fire and slow it in that area, which is what allowed them to defend the homes in Myers, which is how we managed to not have losses in the basin itself. So that's pretty strategic, incredibly impactful. That last layer is really this home hardening. So this is where you're doing your defensible space and making simple retrofits on your home to try to keep that fire off your property and away from your home. So what we found in wildfires is that homes burn from the inside out during a fire. It's because embers can get into your attic or under your vents. Heat from, if you have a plant right next to your home, that heat from that plant burning could burst your windows, and then flames get in, embers get in and then ignite your home. And so being able to essentially ember proof your house is a really critical way, and try to keep the heat intensity away from your home is a really important tool for keeping home standing. I mean, and again, like, it depends on the fire, right? This isn't 100%. We saw in Paradise, hardened homes that had the home hardening standards. So any home built after 2008 is going to have in the building code these home hardening interventions are built in. Homes built after 2008 in the Camp Fire had about a 50 to 60% chance of survival. Homes built before 2008 had a 10% chance of survival in the Camp Fire. So this increased chances, but again, it's not 100%. So, all of these interventions it's really important to think of them like seatbelts, right? They and car safety standards individually, they'll have an impact in improving safety. Collectively, if you have seatbelts, airbags, and anti-lock brakes together, they actually have a larger safety impact than just the sum of their parts. And so that's what we're seeing, is that when we're investing across these 3 fronts of fire resilience, you have a much larger chance of having your community withstand the fire, just as we saw with Pollock Pines and South Lake Tahoe. Right, for a week, as that fire, they used the fuel breaks to slow down the fire before it hit those Sly Park neighborhoods. And so that's where I lived, by the way, is in Pollock Pines in Sly Park Hills. So it was like staring down my old neighborhood where my cousin still is, and the firefighters went in and they actually did defensible space and backburns in the neighborhood. So for homeowners that had done their defensible space, it was great. For those that didn't, the fire crews just went in and did it during those couple days when the fire was, when the wind died down, but they still couldn't get into the really difficult terrain with anything significant to try to stop that fire. And so it gave them this window to get that defensible space in place, and we didn't lose homes in Sly Park and Pollock Pines, which is remarkable. So then there's also structural investments that we're making as well. So across those 3 fronts of fire resilience, that's that $1.5 billion I was telling you about. We're doing investments across those fronts, and now we're making sure that our strategies for doing those interventions are regionally driven. So your resource conservation districts, your local conservancies, they're going to be leading those strategies. So we have funding to get them staff and planning tools to design projects and programs that are fire resilient plans that are unique to their fire adapted ecology. Coastal redwoods are going to need something different than the high Sierras, which is going to need something different than Southern California. Different ratios of those 3 tools, of those 3 concentric circles. And so, so that's why we're investing in regionally driven strategies, and that's paying off. Science-based management is crucial. So we're doing a lot of studies and getting a lot of spatial technology, partnering with NASA to improve and more refine our work so that we can know, hey, if you're going to put a prescribed fire here, how's that going to impact your forest hydrology and the stream levels below, right? Or if you're going to, how does this intervention, like CAL FIRE is now designing their fuel breaks with the Native Plant Society, and you got morning glories blooming and milkweed in a strategic fuel break outside of Colfax. And it's really, and so you've got monarch butterflies there now. So it's important that in these fire adapted ecologies, it's very easy to do sort of the fire adapted interventions in a way that actually enhances both biodiversity, carbon sequestration, forest hydrology, that kind of stuff. We're also investing in workforce development and business development. There's a lot of material coming out of these forests. And then we've done regulatory reform so that we don't have to sort of have this political pressure to exempt CEQA. We found a much more efficient way to just achieve the environmental reviews that are needed to make sure that these projects are safe. The last thing I want to really highlight is this business forest development. There are 400,000 slash piles like this around Lake Tahoe. So this is a product of a forest thinning project, and there's not much destination for that woody material. So often that gets pile burned in the winter, just releasing all that carbon into the atmosphere. But we had some around Pollock Pines, and we had to actually dedicate an entire fire truck to one slash pile. And so to prevent it from complicating the fire, because as you can imagine, that burns hot and fast and hard. So creating an infrastructure where we can convert that to jet fuel, cross-laminated timber, even using sort of small mills just to convert it to lumber, where you can do merchantable, smaller diameter stuff, converting it to even biomass to energy facilities. There's a whole suite of technologies. And again, they really depend on the type of technology for what's right. But what we know is that we need an infrastructure in place to create a destination for this material. My favorite is this cross-laminated timber that you see in the picture above. That is that replaces steel and concrete in skyscrapers. So it's compressed. That then is incredibly strong. It sequesters that carbon for a really long time, and it replaces a greenhouse gas, a dirtier technology. So I'm excited to have that. So that's what we're doing on the fire front. And you guys got the full tour, but it's a lot of work and it's a lot of partnerships. There's a lot of collaboratives engaged. And but it's also really a whole community effort, that getting your homes hardened, your defensible space in place is crucial, but really understanding what we're doing and why. And we're going to start really seeing that at scale as the resources roll out to invest in all of those fronts that I was describing.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you so much for that. It was a wonderful presentation. We have a few other presenters. We may end up going over 1 o'clock. We'll try to shoot to end at 1, but I know there are lots of questions coming in, and there are a few presenters who are going to talk about. They're from our team, our wildfire team, and a few of them are from Placer County, California. They're going to talk about what their local league has been doing and what their community has been doing, kind of bringing Jessica's general points home to a specific community, specific county in California, and then we'll have time for questions and answers. I see a lot of people already putting questions in the chat. So Terry Rodriguez, I'm going to turn it over to you, Terry. Can you unmute yourself?
Sorry. Am I on share?
You are.
There we go.
You are on share. Yes.
Okay, good. Let's get into it. And what I'm going to be doing is presenting the Placer County Wildfire Preparedness Model. I live up here in Placer County. I also live in Auburn. And so this is a very good model that I would like to see emulated throughout the state. According to the officer of the emergency services, he indicated that no such model exists anywhere in the state. So I'm presenting this as an example. And I'm using the website, and the actual website. This is the website of the Fire Safe Alliance. They went to a lot of work to create this, to provide a lot of information to our community and as to what the local wildfire teams are doing to protect our community. As you indicate, they have their mission. The vision of the Placer County Fire Safe Alliance is to have informed, educated, and fire defensible communities that will, well, let me get rid of this. In enhanced protection, it's covering one part of my thing here, of lives, property, and natural resources through a collaborative approach in a fire-prone environment. And the Placer County Fire Safe Alliance provides community assistance, information, and fire educational programs in an effort to reduce the risk of wildfire danger to life and property in our county. At this meeting, for which I attend, they have the various important actors in the wildfire defense, such as representatives from CAL FIRE, the Auburn City Fire Chief, the district fire chiefs, the officer of the Office of Emergency Services, FireWise community leaders such as myself. And it is chaired by the Placer County FireWise coordinator, which I will discuss later. Now, if you look in the left side, it shows where it says like Forest Hill, Iowa Hill Fire Safe Council, Greater Auburn Fire Safe Council, Greater Lincoln Auburn Area Fire Safe Council, and North Auburn Ophir Fire Safe Council, and Placer Sierra Fire Safe Council. These councils represent a geographical region within Placer County. I attend the North Auburn Ophir Fire Safe Council. This is where the public within the region can come to a meeting and they could learn about the same mission as set forth by the Fire Safe Alliance and offer requests for assistance. In this case, one of the assistance I needed was communication with my FireWise community, which was difficult. So they got a grant to create a letter with all kinds of information that they sent to each resident within their area of responsibility. Okay, let's see if I could. Oh, wow. The share screen is obstructing what I want to show. Okay, this is how the county prepares. This is an informational part of their website, which is extensive, very good, excellent, far superior to what they had years ago. Here they talk about shaded fuel breaks, about reforestation, and they even have a part about the county FireWise communities, which I will discuss later. Also, to get people to sign up for Placer Alert, which is used during emergencies to alert us of any incidents that may be occurred or about evacuations. They also have advertised their Ready, Set, Go program. And here's Ready Placer to get us ready for any wildfire incident. It leads you to another website that will give you information on any emergency service. In our case, we are talking about wildfires. And this is how they prepare our community for any emergency service regarding wildfires, evacuations, which was excellent during the river fire, red flag warnings, and resident preparedness. As Jessica indicated in her model, the center of responsibility for wildfire preparedness and protection is the resident. And here is information that can be found to inform the resident as to their responsibility and what to do in the event of a fire and how to be safe. And they have a program, the Ready, Set, Go program, which is statewide, offered by CAL FIRE. And I'm not too sure if any of you have seen this, but this is a brochure that's commonly put out in paper, but it's on the website for anybody to read and to learn about how to protect their property and how to react in emergencies. Now, the bottom line is the property owner is responsible for their property and for protecting their property from wildfires, as well as the community. And it's kind of divided into three sets of people. The one that we don't like is what they refer to as, why do I have to, property owner. This is the property owner that doesn't want to be told what to do or have government tell them what to do, and is not going to either do anything or comply with the ordinance. And that is a fire danger. A second tier is where communities get together to do defensible space, home hardening, and comply with the ordinance. But the one I'm going to lead into is the FireWise community. Let's see if I can find it here. Nope. Yeah, I'm sorry, Dan, but the share screen is blocking what I need to access.
Well, you could just talk about it then, Terry, if you can't access it.
Well, I'm going to access it right now.
Okay.
The Firewise community is, well, it'll show up eventually. The Firewise community program is a national program. And this is where people within a given community can decide to define the community, and that community that wants to participate, they would create a committee, and that committee would contact the Placer County Firewise coordinator, and the Placer County Firewise coordinator will guide them through the application process to apply for Firewise certification through this program. If they meet all the requirements, then they are Firewise certified. Again, you can go to the site. Dan, I hope you put this link in for everybody to access. And they can find out more information. This is a yearly program. We must recertify each year. When we do any kind of defensible space or home hardening on our properties, we're required to report our hours to the committee, on the committee. And us as a committee must submit this report to the Firewise USA, and they determine if we comply, and then they recertify us for the year. Now, to give you an idea, again, go back to my presentation. I want to give you an idea how large this is. Not the one I want. There we go. These are the states that have Firewise communities. This is California, and look at the number of Firewise communities in the state of California. And we have 143 in Placer County. When I first started with Alliance, we had 27. And there I am, Sugar Pine Mountain, Auburn, Placer County. Now for the final. Overall, Placer County has a wildfire preparedness plan. Here we go, the protection plan. This encompasses everything. This is their plan as to how they are going to protect our community, educate the public, and get us prepared for any wildfire disaster. And I'm sure Dan will provide the link so you can peruse this.
Yeah, I'm going to, this meeting is being recorded, so this webinar, so it will be posted and everybody will get the URL and on it, including, and then there are URLs going into the chat too.
Okay, well, in conclusion, as I indicated during the Auburn Ophir Fire Safe Council meeting that I attended, and when I indicated I was going to present this model to this forum, the officer of the Office of Emergency Service for Placer County kind of went like this and indicated that this model is unique to Placer County. So I'm presenting this as a model for everybody that's attending this forum to present to their Board of Supervisors to see if they can emulate this model in their counties. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Terry. That was really, really helpful. I'm going to turn it over now to Angela and Paula from Placer County. And why don't you guys go ahead and take it from here?
Thank you, Dan. I'm the former outgoing president.
Unstable, it says.
I'm sorry.
Please mute whoever is muted. Please unmute. Please mute your phone. Thank you. Okay, Angela.
Thank you. I'm the outgoing president of the League of Women Voters for Placer County. And recently, in the past 2 years, we had been working on some program planning. We had decided after the California League had declared a climate change emergency that it was important, at least at that point, I found it be important to be involved in this team, the wildfire team. Since that time, League of Women Voters of Placer County has taken a program planning position on wildfires, and the League's broader discussion on climate change has resulted in the breakout group that was formalized with Dan. as the League's wildfire committee, a team of valuable members from diverse areas throughout California. As a member of the League of Women Voters for the United States, the wildfire team under the leadership of Mr. Dan Zala's team has studied important topics, especially wildfire and the growing impacts upon Californians. Wildfires lead to heartbreaking loss of life and destruction of our woodland forests, coastal ranges, rural and residential areas with lives adversely affected. These are compounded by drought, air pollution, and health catastrophes such as COVID-19, which are taxing local and state budgets. As wildfires wreak havoc throughout the state, we are still combating the effects of higher temperatures and drier soils, resulting in depletion of our natural resources. California must act to protect people, homes, structures, and forests from the destruction brought on by wildfires. And gleaning from our previous presenters, we know that California is acting now as quick as they can. We are, in fact, in a climate emergency. California is facing a twofold challenge, and that challenge is what can we do to protect our natural resources, millions of acres of forest land, including the Sierra Nevada mountain range, from the ravages of wildfires? What can we do to better protect our rural and residential neighbors from further losses due to wildfires? Only in the last few years are homeowners living in and around locations near wildland urban interface areas, known as WUIs, realizing the value and the role of their local fire districts. Many California residents are still learning about the costs associated with creating defensible space in hopes of preventing a wildfire destroying their home. And others are learning how to curb rising insurance premiums, while some are receiving the dreaded cancellation notice of their homeowner's insurance policy. As this committee discussed, there are unknown costs of building a home or bringing one into compliance with current building codes, one that must be more fire resistant than structures built before, for example, the 1970s. So if we were to take an inventory of structures in California, we would note that many of the structures were built before some of the more important codes went into effect to help us harden our homes a little better and to electrify our homes better. So the prevention against wildfire is now in real time and has become a serious topic for residents in California. So the state of California has approached milestones in forest management discussions via current legislation, ongoing legislation, budget and policy creation, with supportive measures implemented at the state level with funding oversight delegated to local jurisdictions. This is in hopes that as we see the support come down, our local jurisdictions will be ready. The joint management of wildfires with local, state, and federal agencies is critical in maintaining our existing housing inventory and protecting the forest canopy from total destruction. So California must act to protect our rural and residential neighbors from structures losses due to wildfires, regardless of causation. There's already a housing market shortage that does not need to be compounded. Preventions of fires that spin out of control due to climate are also impacting the urban areas as sparks travel miles and high wind events.
Right.
The cost to abate California fires fire disasters in the 2022 state budget was about $2 billion. So according to the state budget's 2021 5-year infrastructure plan, it indicates funding is to go directly to implement a comprehensive wildfire and forest resilience strategy.
So Angela,
Yes.
I'm going to interrupt just for a second. I think Jessica has been talking about the California.
Yes, she has.
Yeah, so maybe we ought to just focus your
I'm about to do that right now. As a matter of fact, I do want to make sure that I give full credit to Jessica for all the work that she has done on behalf of the state in mitigating the problems that we're having now. But as I would like to impress upon you now, we're in a climate emergency and we need to act quickly and be fully informed in our communities as to the cost of abatement or the cost for defensible space. So in looking at the budget and looking at the wildland interface that exists on our land now, where it's privately owned in Placer County, California, approximately rural residential, including the Lake Tahoe Forest, is located in the boundaries of Placer County. So we're 1 in 5 counties. It's a unique county that sits in the north central part of the Sierra Nevada range, including the Lake Tahoe National Forest, which has recently experienced a sharp increase in wildfires. Structures have been destroyed. In November 2018, the Camp Fire destroyed 18,804 buildings were lost and 85 people were killed. And that was a moment of true acknowledgement by most Californians that fires were very, very serious and coming close to our residential structures. In August 2021, the Caldor Fire actively consumed 216,000 acres, the second fire to cross the Sierra Nevada mountain range, south of Pollock Pines and south of Grizzly Flats, crossing Highway 50 all the way to Echo Summit, less than 5 miles from South Lake Tahoe. 713 single-family homes were destroyed, 922 structures total were destroyed, and now that is about 44% contained. These fires, of course, are in real time now, so I would urge you to look at some of the current news information that comes out regarding the fires and to track that. The CAL FIRE organization is stretched due to staffing shortages and other fire incidences. And the residences are realizing that even if you're looking at the Dixie Fire, which was in the Sierra Northwest, Foothills, Plumas, Lassen, and Tehama counties on fire, that was 662,000 acres and 1,208 residential structures were lost, including 130 commercial. So more than 6,000 fire personnel are battling the Dixie Fire. That's a tremendous amount of people on the ground. My heart goes out to the hard work that they're doing now to save our lives and our structures. Wildfires can be attributed to human activity and they have ravaged our communities. You will see that, of course, every day on TV. And this continues unless we abate it early. And that harkens back to Jessica Morse's presentation, where she has indicated to you various levels of work that the state is doing to abate these problems. California's wildfire interface risk models require more of our attention and more resources at the local level. So we must act to save our existing residential dwellings and manage our forests to prevent the depletion of California's beautiful resources. And together we can build better resilience, we can plan better to protect the public and provide for a better future for generations of Californians. So now I'm going to hand this presentation over to Paula, who has a number of slides that she wishes to present to you today. And now I will hand that over. Thank you, Paula.
Okay.
You want to share your desktop, Paula, or you want me to?
I've got it. I'm right here.
Paula
There
is
we go.
also from Placer County.
Okay, can everybody see it okay? So managing and preventing wildland urban interface wildfires. I live in Forest Hills, so I live every section of what I'll refer to as the donut that Ms. Morse presented. So I can relate to every single one of those items she spoke to. So one of our local fire chiefs here said to me the other day, if fire is predictable, it is preventable. And that truly resonates. So I took a look back and we have a lot of predictive modeling that goes back to 2007. These fires are really no big surprise. CAL FIRE had assessments reports that were issued in 2007 that included maps from the Department of Forestry and Fire Protection. So on the local level, because this is near and dear, and as an invested member of the community, and I've been working on these issues hands-on for 6 years to better understand them, get tax ballot measures passed, and educate the public, we've done a lot of work in this part of Placer County. So when we look at these maps, we see that Auburn and Colfax were identified as very high severity zones. So here's the overall map from CAL FIRE, and it shows the areas in terms of who has responsibility, and then obviously the red is very high fire zone. So this is what I call predictive modeling. If they think there'll be a fire here, most likely count on there being a fire, so prepare. So drilling into Placer County, we have a lot of red spots. So that means we have to pay close attention to what's happening. So, you know, we have the Auburn fire, the bridge fire. So what I look at is within Placer County, what are some of our barriers to success in preventing fires? And yeah, we are in an area that is surrounded by county parks, state recreation areas, national forests. So that means residents living in these WUI areas are very reliant on the public agencies to do the work they need to do based on knowing the modeling to help prevent the fires, and then requiring us, the residents, to do our part. So I'm not going to read through all the points. What I will draw attention to is that we do have limited funds and resources available. Homeowners are, if they can find someone to do it, are looking at approximately $1,000 per tree to remove. And that's probably about a 100-foot tree to 125-foot tree. Bigger or closer to structure could get more expensive. Then the other challenge we face is, within the, how do you get rid of the debris? We have a very small chipper program in Placer County that's understaffed. We have these longer fire seasons, so fewer burn days, and we're challenged. Even if we remove it, where do we take it? Where do we put it? So the community needs help with that. And then, as I said, it's who can help you do it? There aren't enough laborers. There's a shortage. And that also ties back to the housing shortage. There's no place to live. So it's just, we're on a cycle. And then the other crux thing is we have these underfunded independent fire districts. At the state level and federal level, yes, you have US Forestry, you have CAL FIRE. But then it's talking about these independent fire districts that are located in these smaller communities that rely on self-taxation to operate. They don't get county subsidies, and they're not reimbursed by PILT money because that's all under the control of a county. So that's a barrier to fire prevention, and we rely on the independent fire districts to go out and do the property inspections for abatement. But if they're out on mutual aid or strike teams, then we have an even bigger shortage. So what's the outcome to this? Well, we have predictable fires, and then they happen. We have the river fire that took place in August, and we have the bridge fire, which is still currently being suppressed. We know it's human activity, and these are either in county areas or state recreation areas. And if you go and take a look, there was awareness, it was reported, overgrown vegetation. We understand that there's an element of transients and open fires, and there's no oversight. So it's great on a high level that we look at all these things, but it's the ground floor. We are the eyes, ears, and boots on the ground here. And when we see it, observe it, and report it, we need people to act, and not so we're just reacting when there's a fire. So the further challenge for Forest Hill, which everyone has heard about in the news, it's this one way in, one way out. We only have one in the fire jump both sides of the road here. So we were shut down. So going on from here. So if we go back to the CAL FIRE modeling, sure enough, the evacuation areas and the fire for the Auburn State Recreation Area was exactly where they predicted it to be in 2007. Now imagine we're 14 years later. So, we have the incidents, and Angela has already spoken to the loss to date, and I don't even know that it includes everything from the recent fires, Caldor and such, but this is just a point in time. So now I'd like to benchmark off of what Angela and Jessica were touching on. It's the cost of prevention versus suppression. So we know there's going to be some additional funding possibly coming in or getting approved to help towards prevention. And, because given the cost of suppression, I would like to see more funding towards that prevention, but it also needs to come to a local level so that we can maintain every housing unit. We have a shortage, and we have a shortage of rentals. We have a shortage of homes for sale and or affordable housing. We can't afford to lose one structure. So, you know, and we have to, because we're up here in Forest Hill, we're very mindful. We have a water district to protect. We have the Placer County Water Agency up here, and we have power sources. So this is just an overview. If you really want to see how much money used to be spent on suppression compared to where we are today, we're over 1 billion. So we need to do more preventative. So managing defensive plans, I think it needs to be more aggressive and more clearing by forestry and CAL FIRE, and that sounds like it's going to be happening. But we also need to look at the role of property and building code. So timely inspections and compliance follow-up. Mobile home parks in high fire areas are a real threat. They don't hold up well to heat or fire. And we've just had a mobile home park up here in Forest Hill. We had a fire in January, and then subsequently that wasn't mitigated. And so that mobile home park, while the Colfax fire was taking place, we just had 2 more units burn in there, and it abutted CAL FIRE and forestry. This could have been disastrous. So I think more promotion and enforcement of the vegetation abatement is important. And I would love to see the requirement of having to report a neighbor removed, and that the counties consider, if you see it, they'll take care of it, because Placer County employees and fire staff are around. It shouldn't take reporting. I think if you see it, act on it. And then
I'm sorry,
I think,
Paul, what do you mean? What do you mean if you see it, act on it? What does that mean?
well, I think that right now the fire district and Placer County requires neighbors report or tell. In other words, the county doesn't have a proactive role. If they see it, they can abate it, or they can take a proactive role in addressing the issue. Instead, it's put back onto residents and abutting property owners to turn in thy neighbor. And that is not a healthy way to manage potential wildfires, because people are reticent, they're afraid to do it. And depending on where you live, there's an element of danger.
Okay.
So, and let me move on. So,
Yeah, and I just want to, let me interrupt just for a second. We are over 1 o'clock. We've been on an hour, and Jessica, how much, I'm hoping that we have a little more time for question and answer, but I know we're running over. So I'm going to ask Jessica to tell me how much time she might have to stick around to answer questions. Are you there, Jessica?
Yeah, hi. I could answer questions for a few minutes now if you guys want to pause and get going. I probably have to leave by 1:15.
Okay, why don't we do that? Paul, I'm going to pause you for a second.
okay.
Because Jessica's going to have to be on her way, and then we can stick around and keep talking. I know Ann's going to talk too. So I'm going to ask Diz to look at the chat.
Yeah,
And-
there are a number of questions, and
Yeah.
a number of them talk about the overlap or the need for integration of different authorities. So forest, federal, state, and various local authorities, and to as well as private. So for example, PG&E, there are complaints. How does PG&E cooperate? They tend to remove trees around their lines, but then they leave the slash on the ground and require the homeowner to retrieve that. Is there any comment that you have on how cooperative PG&E has been?
No comments. I think we're all kind of in the same boat with them. I can tell you some proactive things we're trying to do. So, I mean, obviously they're in violation of forest practice rules when they do that. And so CAL FIRE has been doing enforcement with them as well as the water boards and others, because that's not within rules. But also we've been trying to be a bit proactive too, because they're not being super responsive to the fines. So so on the proactive sense, I've been working with them to try to build for that sort of forest material into their business model, so that they could potentially own mills or biomass facilities and sort of create a destination of that. I've also sort of pitched them on the concept of becoming a woody feedstock aggregator, because as you saw me standing next to that slash pile in that picture, it's a real problem of like, what do you do with this woody material? So what we have in the budget right now, and have launched something called the Climate Catalyst Fund, that gives zero interest loans or loan guarantees to startup businesses in that area. We're doing kind of supply chain demonstrations. So part of the challenge is that it's really hard to get sort of a supply agreement that like you can get feedstock out of this area, because this project is going to be thinning this area for the next, 5 years. And so we don't have that consistency, but we will now. So we've been trying to get PG&E to become a feedstock aggregator, so that people could pay them to also remove other feedstock and then take it to a destination. We're also looking at sort of offsetting the cost, not for PG&E, but writ large, of transporting that woody biomass and woody non-merchantable woody material out of the forests. So there are some tools, and I'm so sorry that everyone is experiencing this, that sort of, I think it's very expensive for homeowners to get stuck with, under the guise of hazard tree removal to have trees downed and limbed. They've been limbing them to, like, they've been cutting them down to like 6 feet. And so if you're going to actually make something merchantable, then it has to be 12 feet long is mill length. And so, I mean, they're even just sort of rendering it so that you can't even get it to like a mill or a micro mill. So anyway, we've been trying to work with them to have a little more cohesive footprint. But to that bigger point of like, how do we work with all of our partners? Because as you've seen from these presentations, the land ownership in California is a mosaic. 57% of the forest land is owned by federal partners, 3% is owned by the state, and 40% is private. And of that, so within that kind of 40% window, 26% of the total forest land is actually owned by small forested family landowners. And so these are people that can't often afford it. So we have different strategies to support all of those lands. We've launched a program to do fire resilience specifically on state land, so that if you're up against a state park or fish and wildlife landholding, that's not going to be a fire risk for you. One thing I wanted to point out is that in this budget, this 1.5 billion, actually got half of it early in an emergency appropriation in April, and have been putting work on the ground already. And so really sped up that process. So like Fish and Wildlife already did huge treatments around much of their just between April and July of this year. So we're getting there, and it's a mosaic, and it requires a lot of collaboration and work. But that's why we're getting the that's why we have that shared agreement with the Forest Service that really lays it out for us.
Okay, it's a challenge for sure. I did have a question regarding egress and ingress on existing roads. Fire chiefs have recommended that you limit the length of dead end roads, so there's not just one way in and one way out. It's not a long way, and that not be too narrow. But apparently, according to this questioner, the Board of Forestry has removed length and width limits. Is there a rationale for that? In addition, development tends to take place along any road, so that exacerbates the question. Comment?
Yeah, so the Board of Forestry is currently updating the fire safe regulations for development in communities. It's really the goal of like making sure that communities built on areas that are stranded on narrow roads, like road in Pollock Pines is kind of the nightmare example I give, and we just had a big fire there, right? 10-mile long Gold Rush era road, has no shoulders. You get one jackknife truck and everyone's stuck. Everyone's stuck getting out anyway, but that's why they were slowing the fire before it got out there. And so everyone was able to evacuate, but it's kind of the nightmare scenario. Also really looking at like where people can build. Should you be building on top of ridge tops that are, or the top of canyons, that are incredibly fire prone? And so there's So those regulations are in process. I think you're citing an old draft. The new draft should be coming out at the end of the month. So don't overanalyze the old document too much. And so a lot of the balance that's happening in there is that they're looking at sort of giving communities a suite of options of how to maintain the fire safety. So for example, like we would just want all of the roads to be 20-foot wide roads, but we can't necessarily mandate that of the community because physically there's some areas where you just can't widen the road to 20 feet. So then you say, okay, well, make sure you put a fire hydrant in there. Then if your roads aren't fast enough for escape, or, you can't improve your road, then improve your fire resilience infrastructure, right? So they're kind of, they're giving people some tools. And again, what the Board of Forestry is setting are minimum fire safe standards for communities to then adopt into their local zoning ordinances. And the communities are going to have to enforce them and can build on those to be even more resilient. So like if you have a 14-foot road, then there'll be a requirement of make sure there's a shoulder that can have you that kind of wide enough path to get to that 20-foot requirement, that kind of stuff. So it's very technical, but the goal is to make sure that we have communities that are upholding these just basic standards so that we're not doing new development in a way that's going to make people completely vulnerable to in peril of fire, that their infrastructure is not putting them in peril.
Okay, thank you for that. You talked about not building along ridge tops, for example, and that's just another example of local districts that might want to have development for the tax base, but then you have the conflicting problem of who pays for the fire and who pays for the emergency exit and so forth. So you've talked about that this is being worked on. How successful are we being with getting to the local community, funding the local fire agencies and so forth?
So one of the big programs we have is called the Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program. That's getting money down to the local level into these fire collaboratives. We also have the Fire Prevention Grant Program, which a lot of local fire safe councils and Firewise communities support. We're also investing in the UC Fire Advisors Program, who are designed to really work with local collaboratives to increase that. Another tool that's coming out is we're piloting a program that does direct intervention to help people kind of pay for that defensible space. So this is a pilot. It's going to roll out in 3 counties right now. $100 million. States putting in $25 million. The feds are putting in $75 million. And it's going to be that direct intervention for homeowners that can't afford $1,000, as we were hearing, to remove a tree. This program is designed to help. So there's a lot of education and outreach at the local level too. But in addition, there will be support to get out to actually execute.
Okay, thanks. This is maybe just perception, but one of the questioners says that there seems to be a lot of effort in less densely populated areas, like the larger forests, more than in the urban areas. But you've kind of just answered that. Would you like to expand?
Yeah, I don't know if that's accurate. I mean, I think you might see it a little more easily in the forested areas, just because it's a little more visible. But in the urban communities, yeah, I mean, it's so like San Diego, for example. So with these early action dollars, we did a program with the San Diego Resource Conservation District that was part of this Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program, highly densely populated area. They did a chipping program to help people do this defensible space, and they chipped something like 80 homes within just the first couple months, and I think they've got 250 that they're probably at up to now. They were pretty close to getting there last time I checked in. And so those early dollars are making an impact. So yeah, I mean, these are both in urban and rural communities. It's really based on where we're seeing the highest fire risk. So we have high fire risk landscapes that are identified. And so if you live in a high or very high fire risk zone, a lot of these resources are heading into those communities.
Okay, and one question that has been asked 3 different times is apparently the U.S. Forest Service policy to let the fire burn in Caldor near the origin of the fire happened. And it, of course, went well beyond that. What is your comment on that?
I think they're mixing up the Tamarack fire. So the Tamarack fire was a lightning strike from early July 4th, and it burned at about 40 acres for about 2 weeks. It was in kind of an intense granite area. Again, it's Forest Service Region 4, so that's the Nevada side of the Forest Service. Section over that area, and Forest Service Region 5 offered to hike in and try to put it out. I think one of the challenges we're seeing with the Forest Service is that they have been short-staffed. So the usual supervisor on the Nevada side who was there had gotten redeployed somebody else. So the person who really understood the landscape wasn't there. And the general policy of the Forest Service had been let it burn. The challenge we're having is that we're not in environmental conditions right now. It's so dry to let it burn, right? Typically, if you thought, hey, at 10,000 feet early July in California, you would assume that there would still be snowpack up there, right? But our snowpack was gone out of the High Sierra in early May, and those conditions were incredibly dry. So those were almost September conditions in July. They chose to let it go, and I think they've learned that lesson, right? And what was interesting is that when they lifted that sort of let it burn policy, right? Chief Randy Moore, who was our Region 5 forester, who's outstanding, is now the chief of the Forest Service. One of his first moves was to come in and change that policy, to say, at the urging of Governor Newsom, to say, no, we can't have just a blanket policy of let it burn, that we have to dedicate resources to full suppression this summer because the conditions are so strained. I think the other thing that's really important is that this is a resource constraint, because we have been at fire deployment. It's called National Preparedness Level 5, which means that 100% of all of the fire personnel, all of the fire equipment, and all of the fire reservists across all of the different agencies, state, local, and federal, have been fully deployed since June. So the resources have been maxed out nationally since June. And that means there's no one else to call, right? Because of COVID, we haven't been getting sort of other people coming in, like other countries coming in to provide us some of that mutual aid that we often rely on. And so with those resources maxed, then they had to make this decision of like, no, we're going to have a full suppression posture and not let things burn this summer, in part because they can't afford to manage it, right? And if you had to, you might have other parts of the country right now that have weather conditions where you probably could have ecological burns happening, but we don't have the equipment or the personnel to dedicate to it because everybody is on these big fires. So it really speaks to why we need to increase the pay of firefighters so that they can hire more for the Forest Service. They just increased their pay to $15 an hour. And it also speaks to why we need to increase our staff for the Forest Service, as well as CAL FIRE, just to be able to have those full resources to deploy to these fires.
One thing additional on the Calder fire, apparently in the Omo Ranch area, it was allowed to burn. And although that has been stopped at the recommendation of Newsom, as you've said, that fire burned across. And for example, one of the questioners says Grizzly Flats was a fire adapted community, yet it was mostly destroyed by the fire. So could you speak to the Calder fire, what went right, what went wrong, and what we learned?
Yeah, I was just up at the base, so I'm not sure where that is coming from. So I talked to the commanders about kind of the first 24 hours of that fire, the Calder fire. So I think you're mixing it up with the Tamarack fire from Alpine County, which was a couple weeks before the Calder fire. So the Calder fire, we don't know the origins, but we do know that the Forest Service and CAL FIRE responded very quickly to it. They were on top of that fire immediately. Within the first 12 hours, it burned Grizzly Flats. I mean, it was burning fast, it was burning hard, and that was devastating. Our deputy, one of our deputy fire marshals lost her home in Grizzly Flats. I mean, it would be the model of defensible space and home hardening. And so that was the challenge with the Calder fires, that the conditions were so dry on the ground and the winds were so intense that the initial suppression just was not able to keep pace. They had about 400 people on it initially, and now we're up to 5,000. So because everybody else was on the Dixie fire. So they dedicated resources and crews on the Calder down there pretty fast, but it was going through incredibly difficult terrain. The conditions, right? I remember that was red flag warning conditions when it started, were incredibly difficult. I was on the phone at midnight with my family up in Pollock Pines saying, just get out, just leave, right, on that that Monday night when it started. And so by Tuesday morning, we had to evacuate Pollock Pines and some of the surrounding areas of Placerville and Camino. And we thought it was just going to wipe out those neighborhoods. But that fuel reduction work that had been done as part of Fire Adapted 50 was really crucial. And that's what saved those towns of Pollock Pines and held it for so long. Yeah, so I'm not sure, Joan. I'm just hearing different things from the commanders on the ground. So I'll just look into that for you. Anyway, so the Tamarack, the Calder fire was just really dynamic and difficult, and the conditions were incredibly hard for it. But again, that Fire Adapted 50 work around Jenkinson Lake and around Highway 50 is not what we were, is what saved other towns. I mean, but it's been a devastating fire season, right? I mean, we've had these like incredible demonstrations of fire resilience working with like South Lake and Myers and Pollock Pines, but yeah, we've lost Grizzly Flats and Greenville, like entire towns gone in these fires. And so that's why it's so important that we really do this resilience work at scale, but also just recognize that climate change is moving much faster and harder than all of us. And just my heart goes out to, the 2,000 families that have lost homes this summer and livelihoods. It's devastating to be, facing just the scale of loss. Those families, it's hard to recover.
So thank you so much, Jessica. I know you need to leave. We really appreciate your time here, and I'll pass it back to Dan.
Thank you so much. Happy to join you all. Thanks for all of your great work.
Yes,
and yeah. Okay. Bye, guys.
Thanks much, Jessica. Thanks so much. And I just want to mention, we're gonna wrap up soon, but we're gonna return our attention to our folks from Placer County, from Paula, and she's going to finish her presentation. And we have a short presentation from Ann Draper about her league, the local league, and what her league is doing on wildfires. And then I want to mention just one thing, that we had a little technical issue with everybody's showing up as Diz Swift, and apologize for that. And the reason is because we send out a reminder email that just copied and pasted about going in, and this was the link. And unfortunately, Zoom thought that if you use that link that you were Diz Swift. So great apologies, especially to Diz, having to see her name repeated so many times, and to all of you. Want to mention one other thing. This is being recorded, so and we will notify you when we have it online for you to use. And I'm also going to be saving the chat and making that available as well to anybody who's attended this meeting. So I'm going to turn back to Paula. Paula, are you still there?
I am. Thank
Great.
you.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Paula.
Do I need to reshare my screen, or can you see it?
No, we're still seeing your screen, so you just keep going.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, just in summary, and I think Jessica touched on these, and it's wildfire prevention, because prevention is a lot less expensive than suppression. And so residing in the wildland urban interface area, the WUI, it's important that we all embrace the recommendations, because we don't want to just save our lives and our homes, but it's also the forest. This is where people come play to, enjoy, rest, and relax. And we do have natural resources up here that are critical to all of Placer County and beyond. Right now, we are faced with the challenge of Auburn State Park wanting to expand. Unfortunately, it is in a high fire danger area, and with climate change and how can they really mitigate it, we'll have to see. But I think right now, trying to expand anything and putting more people into a high fire danger area comes with a lot of risk. And then recognizing the value of our small independent fire districts. They know the areas really well and work closely with forestry and CAL FIRE, and we need everyone. And somehow rather, instead of putting all our eggs into one basket, we need to see if there isn't a way we can keep our independent fire districts viable, or we are going to have a bigger gap and less coverage, and these fires could get bigger. In terms of homeowners and landowners, I think direct incentives that pay them to get the work done versus having to go through a lot of complexity or waiting for someone, programs they can apply to would really, really help. And then it's a matter of educating them and somebody following through to make sure the work happens. So I really appreciate the time. Thank you. And I will turn it back to you, Dan.
Okay, thank you. If you could, yeah, great. And Ann, I'm going to ask Ann to speak now about her local league. Ann, are you there?
Okay, I
Great.
am.
Great.
Hello, my
Ann?
name is,
Oh, by the way, I'm going to bring up your slides, right, Ann, because you can't share slides, right?
that's right.
Okay,
My
so
name
let
is
me,
Ann Draper, and I'm a member of the South San Mateo County League. And the leagues, they're of San Mateo County, there are two of them, are in the middle of a 6-part series online forums about climate resiliency. One of our forums focused on our county's fire risk, and we had about 250 people attend. So we thought that was very successful. Our league team that you've seen today thought that all leagues may benefit by holding a community forum to learn and understand their local fire risk setting, the status. We've heard a lot from Placerville today, and they're very active. And what we're realizing is that different counties and different communities are just different. And as one CAL FIRE representative stated, all of California will burn. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And we thought that was really a pretty chilling outlook, and one that says we need to be all ready. So today I want to share with you the key factors in the organization for our forums. And hopefully this will help you to organize an event in your area. And what we found was that in San Mateo County, we have both a ocean side and a bay side, and down the spine is heavily forested areas. And even in our urban areas, there's a lot of trees. We experience that we've had catastrophic fires, and we've also had a lot of winds. And so although some people might see us as an urban county, we have the combination of all the factors which makes us high risk for fire as well. And so as you look at your county or where you live, you might see the different fire risks. So the first thing that we did was, what geography do we need to cover? Because we felt that at a minimum, our fire risk needed to be our whole county. We decided that we couldn't go too big or too small, because our league is just the southern part of our county, and the risks and the resources are countywide. So we chose our county. But you need to really think about what geography you may want to cover. And it's not political geography so much as fire geography and the resources to address the fire risk. The next thing we did is look at program partners. We decided that we really didn't know enough about all the different players, and we didn't have the contacts. So we decided to team up with an institutional partner to help bring together the speakers. And we partnered with a special district called One Shoreline. And so they helped in many ways. The first is they got our speakers together. They also prepared an electronic outreach flyer for us, and they were also able to work with the county of San Mateo. And the idea here is that you don't have to, your league doesn't have to do it all alone. You can partner with people who have capacities and contacts beyond you. Program type. We decided to hold our event via Zoom, and this is not only just because of COVID, but because we wanted to reach far deeper into our community. In addition to Zoom, it also live streamed with YouTube. And we also wanted an easy way for people to participate, because as even in rural areas, it's hard to get to a spot. It's the same way in a more urban area, that just the travel time can reduce the amount of people who can participate. And now we're all pretty much oriented around Zoom. So we got a far greater participation into our county. The next was production assistance. We felt that we needed help with the technical assistance. And so therefore, greater than what we had on our league. Therefore, we contracted with our local access TV channel. In addition to the forum management, which was really important, they recorded the event, they streamed it on live on their TV channel, but also after they provided the information on their TV channel after the event. They simultaneously posted it on YouTube, and then later they had an edited version on YouTube, which we were able to also repost on our websites. And at the end of the presentation, I have a link, so if you want to take a look at our presentation. But you'll need to really consider the technical capacity of your league, and that there are partners in your community that can help. The next thing we did was look at outreach. Of course, we used our league contact list for outreach, but through our program partners, we were able to work with the County Office of Sustainability, who was able to use our electronic flyer and send it out to their much larger contact list. In other words, we made it very easy for partners that had contact lists, to push it out to their people. Our DEI teams work to create contact information with people and organizations so that we could reach into the organization, into the communities that are at most risk, some of which are low income and multi-ethnic. Our voter registration teams that were very active throughout all this, the last election, created contact lists, and we use those for outreach. In other words, we had a strategy that we could use every resource that we could get our hands on to be able to put the information out. The program, you've heard a lot today about Placer County and about what the state is doing. We decided that we would really focus on what is the status in our county? Where are we now? Where are we going? And we wanted to get our local community members excited about doing something. And so we really narrowed the things that we covered to look at that particular focus. And our meetings were 90 minutes. The speakers spoke for 45, and the last 45 minutes was for questions. And there were a lot of questions. On program content, I've already covered that. We really focused on what we thought would get people excited. Translations. I don't know about your community, but we have a lot of different speakers or languages in our county. So while the speakers were in English, we had simulcast translations into Spanish and Mandarin. And that's another reason why we needed technical support, because we didn't know how to broadcast the simultaneous translations. And the YouTube recordings are also in the 3 languages. And so when you take a look at your forms, not only for fire, you also might want to consider what languages in your program areas, or who do you want to reach with the information. We did this also because we really wanted to help implement our DEI goals. Finally, we had there's so many moving parts to this by all the partners that we had, that we had a taskmaster that really kept all the moving parts moving in the same direction. And tonight is our 5th presentation, and it happens to be on sea level rise. But by now, everybody sort of knows what they need to do, and we just need to remind people. And Dan, if you could do the last slide.
Yep.
This is our links if you want to see what we did. And you can see that we have different links, but they have the same thing. And I hope this short little bits of information help you organize or think about what you might want to do in creating a fire risk reduction event forum in your league area. Thanks.
I will put these links in the chat as well, so people can link directly to them, because these are static. Well, thank you so much. I have been really happy with this webinar. I want to mention that there are a lot of folks here who are not from California, and of course, as you can see, is obvious, people who have been presenting are all Californians, and but we encourage people from out of California to participate in our team. We meet once a month, and we move from just totally state issues to national issues, federal issues around land management and around forests and wildfires. We may in the future hold another webinar where we kind of widen the attention to other states instead of just California. But for all of the folks here who are not from California, we appreciate you attending, and hopefully you've learned something and are up for sharing your experiences in your states, as well as we focus on the national situation.